All right, hello there, thrill seekers. Could you tell that guitar solo was backwards? I played a test version of that for my wife. It wasn't the same one that you saw, and she was like, she couldn't tell it was backwards, so I tried to make it a little bit more obvious. So that the backing track was based on a song called Skiing, which shows up on George Harrison's first solo album, which is called Wonderwall Music. And my friends in Plastic Land used to play it live, so I kind of learned it from the Plastic Land version. Anyway, and then the guitar solo is backwards. So that was me filmed normally and then reversed in post-production, as they say. So you got some special effects this time. Today, I would like to first thank those of you who came to the Banyan Books event and the East West Books event. That was really nice. Next events that I have come up, I'll tell you about them. I'm doing loads and loads of interviews, so you can see a lot of those, but I don't have a list right handy of where I've done interviews for my new book, The Other Side of Nothing, so you can see a lot of those things or hear a lot of those things on podcasts and whatnot. And I'll try to come up with a list of the ones I've been on so you can look for them. Okay, so what I would like to talk to you about today is kind of not the thing that I had initially intended to talk about today, but it's something that kind of came up over the weekend, and I thought it was interesting, so I thought I'd talk to you about it. This guy, who is a Patreon supporter of mine, wrote me an email about his struggles with addiction. He didn't specify what he was addicted to, but I assume it was some drug or alcohol. And I wrote to him a little bit of advice, which at the time that I was typing it out, I thought that this must be common advice that every addiction specialist must give to people, because it just seems so obvious to me. But he came back to me and said it was really good advice and that he'd never heard it before in all of his years of dealing with addiction. So I'm just going to tell it to you, and we'll see if it's useful to anybody. Now, I have been kind of reluctant to talk too much about the subject of addiction because I've never been a drug or alcohol addict. It just hasn't been a problem for me. And I usually sort of defer people to Noah Levine, the guy who wrote Dharma Punks, because it seems like we share a lot of the same audience. And in fact, I used to get confused with Noah Levine all the time. It doesn't happen so much anymore. But when Hardcore Zen and what was his book, Dharma Punks, were both new on the shelves, I used to get confused with him all the time, to the point where I saw at least 2 websites that had reviews of Hardcore Zen accompanied by a picture of Noah Levine. So I thought that was funny, because I guess, he looks more like the kind of guy you'd expect to write a book with a title like Hardcore Zen, so they'd put a picture of, shaven-headed Noah Levine in his leather jacket instead of a picture of, ordinary looking me. It was probably did better for my books to have his picture on the reviews instead of my own. But anyway, so I tended to kind of defer to him because he has a history of addiction and he knows how to deal with addiction from a Buddhist perspective. And I thought, well, that's his niche, and I'm not going to invade that. I'll just do what I do. But this little advice kind of worked for me. Now, as I said, I was never an addict of any sort of drug or alcohol. I just never had that particular problem. But I think we're all addicted to lots of stuff. And I think addiction is an issue that goes deeper than mere drugs and alcohol. I think addiction is kind of a response, a habitual response that we have to the fact that life kind of sucks. Things are... Not all of life is suffering. This is the thing that Nishijima Roshi objected to in the standard formulation of the Four Noble Truths, is because they're usually pitched as all life is suffering. And Nishijima Roshi would say, well, there's some good things in life, and if you tell people all life is suffering, they're going to say nonsense. Not all of life is suffering. But yeah, on the other hand, everything has an element of suffering in it, and there's a lot of suffering in life. And a lot of us find, I think maybe everybody, finds some kind of thing that they do, some kind of coping strategy that they do, and some of them can become addictive in ways that are very similar to the way drugs and alcohol become addictive. for me, there have been a few of them. Some I don't want to talk about, because it's sort of embarrassing. But, I was also addicted to unembarrassing things like record collecting. Record collecting is a fairly innocuous addiction because it doesn't usually cause you any big health problems and, whatnot. But it can become a problem. For me, especially living in Japan, where it was kind of a record collector paradise, I could just go out, and I was making good money. I could go out every week and buy 10 or 15 records if I wanted to. And after a while, I didn't usually buy 10 or 15 a week, but I'd probably buy a few every week, literally, 2 or 3 or 4 every week. And that adds up, and it becomes a problem, and you got records all over the place and so on, and it becomes, and it's an addiction that you just keep doing over and over and over again. So there's one little method I found to deal with addiction, which I told my correspondent about in my email, that this is the one he never heard before, but this is the one that worked for me. Satisfying any addiction always is a process. So no matter what the addiction is, there are steps to it. So I'll give you the example I gave to my correspondent of, let's say your addiction is alcohol, and that's kind of a common one. So it isn't just you instantly go from craving alcohol to being drunk, right? There's a process that happens between craving the alcohol and being drunk. So for example, let's say you don't have anything in the house. So you crave the alcohol, you got to get out of the house, you got to get your car keys, put them in your pocket, carry them to the car, put the key in the ignition, turn on the ignition, back the car to the driveway, drive down to the liquor store, walk into the liquor store, go and pick out the alcohol you want and take it up to the counter, take your money out of your pocket, hand it to the guy, get the, okay, so I hope you're getting the idea. So there's a whole process involved that is the process between the craving of the thing and the actual satisfaction of the craving. And what I noticed is that every step in that process allows me another chance to intervene, another chance to stop doing it, and it's never too late. So I could become aware of what I'm doing at the moment that I go look for my keys to go drive to the liquor store, and stop it right there and not drive to the liquor store. Or halfway to the liquor store, I could go, oh, I'm doing it again, turn around and go back home. Or if I'm actually fishing the money out of, fishing the wallet out of my pocket, I've got the alcohol on the counter and the guy's ready for me to hand him my money or my credit card or whatever I'm going to hand him. In that moment, I can also interrupt it and go, oh, sorry, I changed my mind, and walk out of the store. So any point in the process, I've got ants all over the place. This is a big problem for me lately, ants all over the place, but we'll talk about that later. Anyway, so at any point in the process, any of these little sub points in the process, I can choose to interrupt it. And in my own case, that has worked. There have been numerous times where I just saw, okay, here I'm doing it again, and here's my chance to not do it, and I stop right then, right in the middle of actually going and doing it. Now, if your problem is alcohol or drugs, the problem is compounded, and I think maybe this is one of the reasons that alcohol is such a big problem, because once you can even interrupt the process after you've started drinking. You can take one drink and go, okay, I'm doing it again, I'm not going to take another. Pour the alcohol out and be finished with it then. But each drink you take makes it harder because, as the Buddhists say, drugs lead to heedlessness, and it leads to a kind of not noticing what's going on, and you can it kind of frees your mind up to start accepting the lame excuses you give yourself for why you have to drink, and so forth and so on, and whatever justification you might be going on in your head will become easier to believe in once you're drunk or high or whatever. But you can still interrupt the process even there. And this, again, to not sound like a broken record, but I'm going to sound like a broken record, this is again where I hate to use that dirty word mindfulness, because mindfulness is so overused these days, but this is where mindfulness comes into the game, because the more mindful you are, the more you are likely to be able to notice that moment when you are in the process of yet again doing that habitual thing that you want to stop. So that's where Zazen comes in. So by doing Zazen, you are doing a practice which is, as I often say, shikantaza. And I've been explaining shikantaza in multiple interviews with people who've never heard of the practice. But it's the goalless practice of just sitting, where you're just sitting and not trying to do anything but sitting. And this practice, I think, is especially useful for that, because it forces you to notice what's going on. Because really, you got no choice. You're going to be sitting there for 20 minutes or half an hour or 40 minutes or whatever, however long you've decided to sit. And the only thing to do is watch what your mind does. And watching what your mind does can get you into the habit of watching what your mind does all the time. And so you're more likely to kind of just not blindly follow this process between the craving for the thing you're addicted to and the satisfying of the craving. You're more likely to be present for that. I just had an interview just before I started doing this video where somebody was trying to get me to talk about the benefits of meditation, and as those of you who've heard me before have already heard, my favorite answer to that is what Kodo Sawaki, who was one of my teachers, said, which is Zazen is good for nothing. So you don't talk about the benefits of Zazen, but I'm going to talk about one of them. And one of the benefits of Zazen that I thought was really interesting, that I've rarely talked about, is I am much less likely these days than I used to be to make what they call Freudian slips. This is where you say something without meaning to say it, and usually they're called Freudian slips because Freud, the psychiatrist, noticed that these were places where people would sort of reveal their true feelings. They'd sort of accidentally say something, or they'd get a word wrong, but the way they got the word wrong would indicate something about what they're really thinking, what they're trying to hide. So I used to do that all the time. I used to do it so much it was annoying and embarrassing for me, and I do it a lot less than I used to before I started meditating, and I think the reason is because I'm more aware of the moment when words are coming out of my mouth. So if I do start to say something that I don't want to say, I can, most of the time, interrupt the process before the word actually pops out of my mouth. So it was something I noticed 20 odd years ago or something. I started noticing that I wasn't making those Freudian slips all the time. And this is related to what I tried to tell you about addiction, because you can start to notice what you're doing when you're doing it. But to me, the best way to learn to do that was a practice where I'm not even trying to learn to do that. I'm not trying to do anything. I'm just trying to stay with whatever moment is actually happening right now. And if you can stay with whatever moment is actually happening right now, you have a better chance of interrupting the cycle of being, craving the thing you're addicted to and satisfying the craving. And as anybody who's given up an addiction knows, the more times that you interrupt that and don't satisfy the addiction in the habitual way, the easier it gets the next time to do that. So that's another part of the process, and it's something that hurts when you first start it, but eventually it gets easier. So there's the advice I gave to the guy about addiction, and I hope that's somewhat useful to you, and maybe he said it was useful to him, and like I said at the beginning, I just sort of assumed this must be standard advice that they give at AA meetings or whatever, but maybe it isn't. Maybe it's not something the AA people have really thought about. This guy told me he'd never heard it in any of his addiction specialists or from any of his addiction specialists that he's gone to, so there you go. So, if you want to help me keep satisfying my cravings for dog food and mortgage payments, you can go to the URL that you are seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.com/. hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate, wherever it is. There you will find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my main and usually only ways of making a living, and I really appreciate your support. But as always, this is offered for free, so you don't got to support me if you don't want to support me. It's all voluntary. And as I told the guy in the email, he said he was having some financial problems. If you're having financial problems, don't donate to me. Donate to yourself. But if you're not, I do appreciate the donations, because that's how I keep it going. Anyway, we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Hi, Ziggy. How you doing? How you doing there under the table? He's been sitting there under this table the whole time I've been doing the video, except for the time that he came around behind me while I was talking. Anyway, there's Ziggy. Alright, Ziggy, we'll see you later. Bye, Zills.